The next sort of piece or the arc of our conversation today, we started with compelling remarks from Amy Abernathy to get us started. We talked about the need to support our regulatory colleagues in flexing their regulatory muscles. We talked a lot about the need to make sure that clinicians are not only engaged, but true collaborators. We talked about getting cover, resources, time from our executive leaders. We talked about the importance of starting with the measures and welcoming our measurement scientists to the table. We talked about how the heck do we actually operationalize this? And we've just been talking about the importance of our regulatory, of our academic colleagues and supporting our academic colleagues in every way possible to get this right. And with that, we'll dive in and we'll talk a little bit about what it looks like when we zoom out. This is all great. We have all of the resources on the table now to have this field really step by step by step, collaborating with one another, coming together and advancing the field. What does it look like when we zoom out? What does it look like when we take, and I'm going to try and move everyone up to the stage here, when we sort of take a more deliberate look at, you know, where are we going? There's a phrase I love from a colleague, Barry Peterson, that I've borrowed for some time now. If you don't know where you're going, anywhere will get you there. And so this policy group or this group that came together to really think about what's the policy roadmap did extraordinary and I think important work to make sure as we do all of this work, as we invest these resources and this time to make sure we're all driving together and in the right direction. We're going to switch it up a little bit today. Jean's going to pop the link into the chat, but before we reveal what's in the dossier, let's go around quickly and do some intros. And I wonder if I could ask each of you to talk a little bit about your background, your passion for this particular dossier, and what you enjoyed about sort of being part of all of this. And Inder, I'll come to you first. Oh, you're on mute, Inder. I'm so sorry. Oh, we might not have. Oh, there we go. We got you. Inder, I misspoke. Steve, let's come to you next, and we'll see if we can get Inder up on the line with his audio.
Good afternoon. My name is Steve Berman. I work at the Food and Drug Administration in CDER in the Office of New Drugs. My focus is on biomarkers and on drug development tools that are novel and that may not meet the statutory definition of a biomarker or a clinical outcome assessment. So I am the current acting lead for a new pilot program focused in that space called iSTAND, designed to encourage the development of these novel drug development tools, while also being mindful of all of our good work in the biomarker program as well. And it's been my great pleasure to participate in the work with this group. And today I'll be speaking on my behalf, not representing the agency as a whole.
Steve, thanks for underscoring that. That's really important. We've learned so much from you and also don't want to sort of misrepresent how you're talking today. So just thanks for being with us. Really appreciate it. Jos, do you want to do your intro next?
Hi there, everyone. Speaking from the UK, which is still in Europe, just not in the EU. We haven't sort of been towed offshore, just in case.
Me, good flair for the dramatic.
My name's Jos Langford. I'm the Chief Technical Officer and founder at Activinsights. Tina, my colleague, introduced it a little bit earlier. But we design and manufacture and deploy raw data, wearables, and deliver data science and data management services. I think for me, getting involved in this program has been really exciting. I've been involved in quite a few community programs around writing standards and developing assets. So as well as having an opportunity to learn in this great space from so many fantastic people, I've also had a great opportunity to learn from Jen and Jean about how to run this sort of program. And I've not been disappointed on either account. So thank you, everyone.
Fantastic, Jos. It's been brilliant to learn from you. Jean and I might actually launch that tugboat and try and get you over here to the US. In fact, it's been such a pleasure and really excited to dive in with you guys shortly. Bray, do you want to do a quick intro next?
Sure. Bray Patrick Lake. I'm a senior director in the strategic partnership group of Evidation Health. We're a company that specializes in measuring health in everyday life and also motivating patients to action using person-generated health data from smartphones, apps, and wearables. And I just was really excited to be part of this this particular group on the tour. One for the collegial interactions and opportunity to also work across countries and think about the international perspectives. We have so much work to do as a field, but this theory of change map and roadmap I'm really excited about and look forward to discussing, Jen.
Fantastic. Thanks, Bray. Inder, do you want to see if we've got you back?
Yeah, let's try once more. Can you hear me well now?
We've got you.
Perfect. Awesome. Sorry about the technology mishap today. So I'm Inderjit Singh. I'm a physician by training, but never went onto the practice side, went onto the dark side and into the business. I am with Roche Diabetes Care. I'm an international business leader in Roche Diabetes Care. My responsibilities are on digital solutions, development, and early commercialization, and with a focus on healthcare providers and payers. So that's where I work in. And in terms of where we intend to see where the future vision is, and that's where I love working with this engaging and enthusiastic group and a very collaborative group, is that how do we bridge the gap which we currently have in the demand and supply. So we have lesser and lesser resources in terms of physicians and money, but we have more and more of aging population with multiple and chronic diseases who need care. And hence, what role could technology, what role could digital measures play? So that's my vision is in this area.
Fantastic. Thanks, Inder. Ed, let's come to you next.
Thanks, Jen. Ed Ramos. I'm Director of Digital Clinical Trials at Scripps Research. Together with Katie Bakamotes, we've been standing up the new Digital Trial Center at Scripps Research, which is a collaboration with Carevolution, our technology partner, on many of our research efforts. This is, since my first tour at Dime, we've been early adopters not only of the philosophy in terms of what the Playbook offers to a variety of different stakeholders, but also in how we integrate it in our own work. So this next step in the latest tour in terms of all the different areas that now we can do some deeper dives in is just an absolutely logical evolution of where the Playbook should go. And super excited about talking through what the team has worked on with regards to policy. At the Digital Trial Center, we most certainly are living and breathing this as we're really trying to take that broad approach of transforming how and where clinical research is done, obviously utilizing digital health measures in a variety of different ways. So appreciate being here.
I'm delighted to have you here, Ed. And we did things a little bit differently on this panel. We haven't given you a sneak glimpse of the dossier yet, but we will do so now. And Jos, while we do that, I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about this theory of change sort of map or model that we've created here. This was a new concept to me, and yet it was such a powerful tool that allowed us to sort of collaborate here and rally round, how do we get from where we are today and how, to a point that we all agree on is a good future state?
Yeah, sure. So I'll try and keep the management consulting spiel to the tight 2 minutes. So the theory of change, it's an approach to formulation of strategy, and it's an alternative to the more hierarchical vision, mission, objective approach that we might be more familiar with in the commercial space. It strengthens its ability to collate and bring together and harness collaborative input. And it's a great tool for ground-up initiatives, bringing together diverse plans and objectives. And it's one that's well understood by policymakers and those reaching out across communities to drive change. At its core, it recognizes that we don't have or have access to the resources that we need to realize our most ambitious plans. We start by recognizing and articulating where we are now and place ourselves in a future that we want to see. The planning is then focused about understanding the outputs needed to deliver outcomes that will achieve impact. And then once you've got that compelling narrative in place, then you can sort of identify the streams of work where you are going to drive, where we're going to collaborate, or where we're just looking to influence. in some ways, if you've not come across it before, it's a bit of an unfortunate name because it suggests some sort of fundamental principles, some sort of physical science, you know, this big theory. And it's not that. And in some ways, it's more powerful than that because really it represents our theory about how the world that we work in is going to change, and we can make it change to create positive outcomes. Personally, I've been involved in these types of planning approaches using theory of change in social enterprises where we were looking to drive digital inclusion. And then more recently within the My Data global nonprofit, where we drive human-centric data considerations. And the work with My Data is really interesting because it's close to this work. And over the last 3 years when we've been able to lean on this model, it's been an enormous support to our ability to influence work. And you can see this most readily in the Data Governance Act in the EU, where we are directly working with the European Commission as a community group with individual members and no direct funding to influence the drafting of that. And that's very much about how we understand our theory of change.
Fantastic. You teed that up really nicely, and I think all of us would agree it's been such a sort of powerful exercise for us to go through together. And you also emphasize something that's really important as folks come to this dossier and access it. We will, we'll try and show it in just a little bit, or make sure we show it before we close. That it's not intended to be sort of dogma. This is not intended to be prescriptive, but rather it's a roadmap, right? It's a common sort of vision of the overall direction we should be pointing and the path that we should be taking. So with that, I'd like to come to you, Inder, actually, if we can. So you sit at an organization responsible for driving innovation. Tell us about how you are driving towards that goal of a sort of a future state where digital clinical measures really change our understanding of sort of health and disease.
Sure, thank you. And that's a good question. So if I just first step back, if you look at Roche as an organization, so it's one of the unique large biotech, which has a pharmaceutical, but as well as a large diagnostic operation. So we bring together these two aspects under one roof, which helps us to truly personalize healthcare. So hence, how do we bring these two things together? And if you look at examples in this space, I will bucket them into 3 areas, which are in line with what we say about the playbook from a clinical research perspective, from a care delivery perspective, and from a public health perspective. So from a clinical health perspective, a research perspective, so we are looking at life sciences insights, which are coming in from some of our collaborations and acquisitions with FMI, with Flatiron, which help us to understand and accelerate drug discovery as well as trials. And then we have platforms and tools which are available to internal as well as external research scientists to advance some of these things forward. And then we also have an app, Floodlight, which looks at how neurodegenerative diseases progress from a focus from a digital solution perspective. So from a clinical research, from a development, we bring various tools and solutions together. Similarly, if you look at care delivery, we have multiple platforms available. Roche Diabetes Care Platform is one of those, where we offer services for understanding various digital signals coming in, provide remote care services, and also clinical decision support. Similarly, we have a Navified Tumor Board, which can help understand what could be the appropriate therapy in oncology space or tracking mutations over there. And then if you come to the third bucket, which is our public health bucket, so we recently, for our COVID, due to the pandemic, we launched something as a Navified Pass, so which is like your passport for vaccination. So hence making it easier to be able to track these. And similarly, as an organization, we also work with various standard organizations to help advance some of the standardization. So some of the questions which came up, are these validated? Are these standard in the past? So we work with organizations like KIMS, with IHI, HL7 to take these forward. So taking a collaborative approach internally with external organizations and with external research organizations is how we are looking at advancing this. And as I said earlier, to bridge that gap.
Fantastic. It's really helpful, and I think it sort of reflects how we thought about this together to hear you sort of pass it out into these 3 buckets. And it's also, you know, really, it's been a theme of the playbook from the start, and it's also a theme of sort of how we've been thinking about this work, creating the theory of change and sort of the companion sort of memo to be like, we can't silo these different areas of impact. In order to really sort of recognize the full promise, we need to be thinking across all of these buckets at any given time. Ed, I wonder if we can come to you next. And while we do it, I wondered, Jean, if you could share a little bit of insights. We've been talking about this theory of change. Let's start to reveal a little bit of the complicated pathway that we were able to distill for folks. Ed, you work with a variety of experts from different disciplines at the Clinical Trial Center. One of the things that we articulate in this theory of change is the importance of education. And that goes back to sort of how Amy opened our day with, a common sort of lingua franca, a real shared understanding of the language we speak and what good looks like. Tell us about how you see the importance of this playing out in your everyday work.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think about it in terms of what is needed to really fill that knowledge base from an educational perspective, and then putting education in a different context in terms of our workforce and what it is we need to think about in terms of how we train those professionals that are coming up to use all of these new digital health measures and approaches, and how they carry out research. So for the former, in terms of really filling out that knowledge base, we're intrinsically faced with the challenge of silos and gaps in data. And it's exactly what I think motivates this paradigm shift to digital research, in terms of being able to shift from an episodic capture of data, for example, to a more continuous capture of data for a given individual. And I loved how Andy put it earlier today in terms of the data actually telling an individual's story, and not just telling their story in the context of their life, real world evidence. And so being able to understand what that means, what is it that the data are actually providing to be able to tell that story is extremely impactful and necessary. The other aspect of that is we often, and certainly in our research, thinking about what it means when we shift out of the clinic, the brick and mortar structure, and really trying to execute these trials in a remote manner. What are the proxies for those gold standard clinical captures of various different health measures? Are we okay with silver standards, bronze standards? Are we okay with understanding what it is we are and are not going to get when we use a particular type of digital health technology for gleaning insight into the participants for these various studies? So all of those things I get excited about, because we've already established some learnings, and it also means that we just need to set up new opportunities to be able to answer those questions and continue to educate our colleagues and our community around what this means. I'll just kind of quickly round out on the workforce side of things. My PhD was in molecular biotechnology. It was one of these new and novel fancy degrees combining all these different disciplines. And in fact, the initial brochure was really just a photocopy of the math department, the genomics department, the biology department, but they call it molecular biotechnology. And now this multidisciplinary approach is ubiquitous among how we train our students and how we train our professionals coming into this. And so I raise that in terms of ensuring that we implement this notion of understanding what ethical, legal, and social implications mean. That needs to be a natural component to and complement to the technical aspects in terms of training. And so excited about the opportunities we have to drive policies to ensure that that happens as well.
Fantastic. So now, Ed, those were tremendous remarks. You really sort of underscored the need to think about education, which, in a professional workforce already sometimes might seem counterintuitive, but absolutely foundational. Now folks have seen a little bit of the theory of change map. They could see that there's these sort of, 4 general sort of channels that we're thinking about. You talked about the innovation piece. Bray, I'd like to come to you next. Right? When we think about one of the greatest impediments to sort of broad trust in all of these digital clinical measures and how we use them, we think about, who's going to have access to my data? How can I protect the data? How can I protect myself? We think a lot about the need to have sort of high protections, lots of opting in, but also high accessibility to get the value out of the data. How do we manage all of this?
Yeah, an emerging field like this. So we've heard about the power and the promise, but we have got to have the data flow, first of all, to have the digital clinical measures, but we've also got to really ethically and responsibly have the protections. And so right now we have this incredible patchwork of frameworks, both in the US and internationally. We really are struggling, I think, as a workforce too. So we've got to make sure that our researchers and our vendors and anybody we work with, our developers, really understand, how sensitive this data is. It is as sensitive as DNA, but it is currently not protected by HIPAA, and we don't have anything like GINA, the Genetic Information Non-Discrimination Act, that actually protected people from losing their employment or, being disqualified from insurance coverage. So as a community, I think we have a real responsibility to coalesce and really push some of these protections forward. There were a number of privacy bills on the Hill in the last couple of years, I think 9. Some of the rooms that I was in it was all lawyers, and I was wearing a patient hat. So we need the people that are on the front lines of working with this types of data to get into these conversations and to really proceed, eyes wide open, and help us get these appropriate protections, and also harmonize internationally if we're really going to realize this potential, but yet make sure that people are adequately protected and that their data is not leaving in the dark of night accidentally.
Bray, you articulate that so sort of beautifully and tee out a few key themes, right? The need for sort of harmonization, the need for engagement of everyone who is involved to get this right. And so what we've done now is we've addressed sort of 3 of our pathways in this theory of change model. We recognize the innovation that needs to happen. We recognize the education that needs to happen. We need to think about sort of data availability and data rights. And Jos, the last piece that we came to was around sort of interoperability. We are awash with data right now. How can we actually make sure that we do this correctly? And most importantly, one of the things I like most about how we manifested the theory of change was not everyone is responsible for all of the things. We teed up that there are some things that folks in our field have to take full responsibility for. There are areas where we want to partner. There are areas where we want to influence, and that's going to be the key to success. How do we make that work in practice?
So the practice probably starts with down in the detail. So let me start at a high level first. I think I talked a little bit about my work with my data earlier. One of the things we like to talk about there is data empowerment. And that's about bringing together data availability with data rights. And I know that both those topics sit, quite clearly within the theory of change. And if you can do both those together, then we're achieving data empowerment. And we talk about that in a human-centric way, and that's not a bad place to start to answer your question. But it also empowers us as organizations and as healthcare professionals to be able to do our jobs better and to reach our goals faster. Within the work that we've done there, we recognize that interoperability is probably the key way of achieving that availability. And when you look through the literature, and there is some good literature on interoperability, it breaks down in 3 areas. Technical interoperability, and that's about getting the interfaces around, moving the bits between different organizations, getting the data from place to place. At another level is semantic interoperability, and that's about making sure the data means the same thing in one place as it does in another. And then a third level is organizational interoperability. And that's about making sure that individuals with organizations are facing the right way, the same way, and that they've got shared goals. So you can think then about the changes that we can make as individuals and organizations at those levels. And I think that's quite a helpful thing to do. And if you start at the bottom of the list I had there, which was the organizational one, a lot of that is what we're doing here. And there was a couple of things that people have brought up. The word share has been brought up significantly, and the ability to share and the ability for programs like this to create a safe space for people to share is really important. The ability to work with regulators to create a safe space to share is something that they really understand very well as well. And I think that spills across into the session we had earlier about academia and industry. The ability to share there is going to be critically important, because that's how we're going to be able to create this lingua franca. the next level we think about is semantic. We talked a little bit about design earlier, about interoperability by design. So Simone was talking about that. This is when we think about the semantic level. If we get the design right, we can do a huge amount there. And as Activinsights, where am I at? That's where we've always been about how do we think about open data formats? How do we think about open algorithms? And those design decisions that you make at the beginning of programs have an enormous impact on interoperability and therefore data availability throughout the program. And then at the bottom level and the technical stuff, often that's about the day-to-day. We all impact interoperability with every decision we make. Shall I use this or shall I use this? Am I going to use this that's off the shelf that's pretty good, but I think I'm clever enough that I can write something better, and hence we grow another standard? Can you pitch in to make an existing standard better rather than try and ask people to use something new that you've created yourself? I'm an engineer, I love making stuff. It's a really difficult thing to do, but it's an important discipline. And this is about the plumbing. And there are different sorts of standards at this level. So I've run standard committees in this space, and they are really important. But at the plumbing level, these are technical standards for engineers to be able to do things in a lower cost, lower risk way. And that's quite different to some of the other standards where we may be standardizing how a measurement is made. And it's important, I think, to make that separation, because there are some easy wins to be made at that bottom level in standardization. And a lot of that is then about how we work. And by thinking across those three areas and keeping in mind, I think, two key things: transparency and usability. And I don't mean the medical device, I'm not talking about regulatory usability, I mean just usability of your engineering, of your stuff and of your data. Keeping those two things in mind, along with those level thinkings, I think is a really great way for us as organizations and individuals to move forward.
Jos, tying so many pieces together there, and it goes back to, and I'm going to reiterate this because I think it's really important, there's a lot of work on deck. The way we are going to do this successfully is by thoughtfully thinking about what we have a responsibility to lean into at what level, where we want to be partnering and where we want to be influencing. And so, Jos, you gave terrific examples at each of those levels for how we can make a difference. And certainly no single entity, individual, organization can be responsible for all of those things, which, Steve, is a nice pivot to you. So I want to underscore, you are one of our FDA colleagues, but you are speaking on behalf of yourself today. One of the myths I think we blew through our work on the playbook that we show here in this theory of change, and that Amy Abernathy mentioned this morning in her remarks, there's a bit of a cultural confusion where everyone's, I'm going to talk in hyperbole for a second, but everyone's sitting around waiting for the regulators to tell them what to do. And what we have clearly realized through our work is that this is not a useful way of thinking about things. This is not a useful way to sort of advance the field. Again, talking from your own sort of perspective, how do we think about appropriately bringing in our regulatory colleagues, and how we think about shoring up things like standards and regulatory sort of activity as we get to a point where we are finally confident in the science and the standards?
Thanks, Jen. That's a really important question. And when I try and approach it for myself, the first thing that comes to mind is a recognition that the frameworks that organizations use for decision-making largely apply, even though we're dealing with a really novel space here. So on the for-profit side, cost benefit, that still applies. On the patient and provider side, the risk benefit to the individual still applies. On the policymaker or the regulator side, risk benefit, for the public health, all of those frameworks still apply. What's really new and novel in the digital health space are the variables that we plug into these sort of standard equations. There are undoubtedly new benefits that accrue from leveraging digital health, but there are also new risks, and importantly, there are new uncertainties that we haven't thought about before. And figuring out how all of these variables fit together into our existing platforms for decision-making, personally, I think is best done as a collaborative effort, both vertically and horizontally through the field. Now, horizontally, we can think about companies working together pre-competitively to establish voluntary standards or to publicize lessons learned along the journey. Providers, patients, can work together to establish best practices. And on a policymaker or regulatory side, we can think about adopting successful programs that exist in other jurisdictions. Now, that's a sort of horizontal approach to this problem. Now vertically, thinking throughout the health ecosystem, to echo Amy Abernethy's words from this morning, I think that's where there's real tremendous value, because we all get the benefit of learning from each other's unique vantage points. Any day that I get to interact with patients or patient representatives, that's a day that I learn how to do my job a little bit better. It's very easy for people in roles like mine to get hung up on p-values or statutory precedent, but ultimately it's important for us to remember what's important. Why are we doing this? And so I think really thinking through the entire health ecosystem through efforts such as this is really so valuable.
Steve, you articulate that so nicely, and I don't want to muddy your sort of beautiful remarks by taking too long to round us out here. There is, so I want to just recap really quickly so folks know what's available to them. So you sort of in pursuit of this improved future state, using all of the tools that are in the playbook, what we've tried to tee up in this particular dossier is a sort of overarching view of how we get there. What it doesn't have is your regulatory colleagues are responsible for everything, but rather it puts the responsibility back onto all of us here in the field who believe in a future state that's better, that's healthier, that's more equitable, and that may or may not, in pursuit of some of those goals, leverage technology at several times. We have a section on innovation. We have a section on data rights and governance. We have a section on interoperability and data availability in all of here, and we underscore the need for education. And so with that, I'm going to do one thing. I'm going to ask all of you to commit to something today. Along each of those sort of 4 pathways, we imagine a long-term and better outcome. And I would like for each of you to think about where you are going to focus your priorities as we move forward into a future state. So I hope I'm not leaving too many people out. I'm conscious of time and I want to make sure we get there. But what I'm encouraged by is there is responsibility for all of this sort of coming in from across the board. And also the ultimate future state where digital clinical measures have redefined our understanding of health and empowering research and innovation. You know, that's a really important sort of step towards, a better future where we're thoughtfully and in an evidence-based way and in a collaborative way using these tools to help all people. So let me stop sharing there. I want to thank all of you for your hard work on this dossier. Steve, Ed, Jos, Bray, Inder, I've learned so much from you. We have new tools in the toolbox, things like theory of change. That's available to you. So is a companion memo and a couple of other treats for you in that policy dossier. Folks will be excited that we're heading into our final break of the day, and then we will come back and we will look at another new methodology that we deployed as part of our work on the playbook, our findings from a pre-mortem activity where we actually imagined a point of failure.